Welcome to Behind the Binary, the podcast that introduces you to the fascinating people, technology, and tools driving the world of reverse engineering. I'm your host, Josh Stroschein, a reverse engineer at the Flare team at Google. In this episode, we are joined by Stephen Eckels, who discusses his journey into the field, starting with his early interest in video game modding and hacking. He shares his experience in discovering the Sunburst backdoor in the SolarWinds attack, and emphasizes the importance of continuous learning, community engagement, and the evolving landscape of reverse engineering tools and techniques. Get ready for an insightful conversation that will shed light on the hidden layers of technology and take you into the world of reverse engineering. So joining me today is Stephen Eckels, Principal Reverse Engineer at Google. Stephen, it's great that you're here. Welcome to the podcast. This is a podcast about reverse engineering. So it's sort of becoming tradition that we first start by talking about how you discovered reverse engineering.
Yeah, so first off, thanks for having me. Really happy to be a guest. I think it's awesome. So my journey with reversing is maybe a little bit different from other people, or maybe it's the same, honestly. I don't know. But the point is, it wasn't really my goal to end up as a professional reverse engineer, honestly. So I'm just going to tell you the start of how I got into all this, and we'll just go from there. It starts when I was pretty young, actually. I played a lot of video games when I was a small kid. My first addiction and really introduction to computers, if you will, was Microsoft Flight Simulator. I would just spend so much time sitting in front of my Windows 95 or XP desktop in my room, just like flying around to different parts of the world and having fun with that. And then eventually installing mods and texture packs and all the kind of stuff that a little kid who's really into gaming is going to do. I also had like an Xbox as I got a little bit older. Pretty quickly, though, that ran out of storage, which was quite frustrating. And I remember sitting with my dad at my computer, and we had actually bought like this really old external hard drive off of eBay or something like that, but it wasn't compatible with the Xbox, but there was like known hacks you could do on the firmware to like get the Xbox to recognize it. So we were just like sitting in my bedroom upstairs and messing around with the hex editor, following like the sketchiest tutorial you've ever seen on how to flip the bytes of this hard drive firmware so that the Xbox would pick it up. And eventually we got it working, which was like kind of mind-blowing to me. But that was probably like my first introduction to the internals of anything, if you will. Just staring at those bytes as a kid, I first off was just like completely awestruck that this was even a thing you could do. And honestly, just like generally curious of like what was happening. I didn't understand any of the stuff that was in front of my face, and I definitely could not follow that tutorial. So that was kind of like my first introduction to all that stuff. That general curiosity with like computers and the internals of stuff kind of picked up as I got a bit older. I started quite young with all this. So maybe around like 10 years old, I started learning VB.NET, and that was actually like my first programming language. And I would write a bunch of little GUI applications and programs, and of course, show your friends and family as people do. And I have this one memory of like I would call my parents in after I wrote this app. You would just enter your age, and then it would print out different messages based on whatever age you entered. But I would, of course, call my parents over, and I had programmed it to say if you were like over the age of 30, it would call you old in all these different various flavors of how you say that. And that, of course, annoyed my parents. But as a little kid, I thought that was the funniest thing in the whole world.
Insult apps, it's like the place to start.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. And then that kind of carried on. I was just programming on the side for like a while. And then when I was in my early teens, I don't know exactly when, let's just say like 13-ish, I was really addicted to first-person shooters, Battlefield in particular. So I played like Battlefield Bad Company 2, Battlefield 3. That was like my thing. I would get home every day after school, play until like bedtime, and that was my life. I was thoroughly in that scene. I was like one of the top 5, top 10 scout helicopter pilots in the world in Battlefield. I was trying out for competitive Battlefield FPS teams. I was like addicted. And that is really probably like where this all started. It was that curiosity with computers, and then that thorough addiction with gaming. I kept programming on the side, and that programming eventually got mixed up in my love for these video games. And I was so into these games that my mom would like yell at me for like, hey, it's dinner time. It's 6 p.m. I already told you that earlier and whatever. So I was like getting in trouble at home for how much time I was spending on the computer. And I, at some point, had the realization that as a person who knows these programming languages, I could like maybe draw a clock over these full screen video games. And just figuring out how to do that kind of led me to some game hacking forums that explained how to overlay onto full screen games. And I basically spent my early teenage years programming, gaming, and writing hacks for those games. And that was kind of my life. And that was how the hobby, because it was a hobby at the time, that's how my hobby in reverse engineering kind of got started.
Yeah, I was into I forget now with time, but one of the first battlefields, and I remember becoming an adept helicopter pilot was really an accomplishment in some of those early battlefields. So I got addicted too, because I wanted to prove that I could actually competently fly that thing and weaponize it in the game and be productive with it. So
yeah, they don't make those games like that anymore. Honestly, I've tried the newer Battlefields, and they are just not as good as Battlefield 3 was.
Yeah. I wonder, just with so much of how much is the game engine itself assisting you versus you are just there battling the math behind the scenes?
Yeah, I don't know. It was fun. That's what I remember. Through the lens of nostalgia, at least, that was the best time ever.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so gaming and game hacking is, I think, a really interesting area. At this point, did you have any idea that there was yet reversing as a career? I mean, did you see anything that maybe was starting to shape itself as a potential future career or anything, or was it still just a means to an end, helping feed your addiction and your love of playing games?
It was purely for fun, 100% a hobby on the side. It was just fun for me. I honestly intended to be a professional programmer. That's what I thought my career was going to be. I had zero intention of even going into security, let alone reversing. I didn't know that reversing was a job. I didn't ever hear about the company Mandiant until I was contacted out of college by that company. I didn't know anything about any of this. I thought I was going to go like be a back-end C++ programmer pretty much until I actually became a full-time RE. Game hacking was just for fun, and it's how I talked with friends. I met a lot of people on these hacking forums that kind of just programmed on the side. That's where I learned this kind of stuff, just how to be a good programmer. How do you learn about the internals of stuff? How do you ask for help? You got to show that you put in the work first. How do you have technical discussions? How do you design stuff? What is terrible? Obviously you're on a forum, so people would make fun of you if you wrote terrible code. So it was a very fun and engaging way to just honestly get good at computers in general. I didn't even look at it from the lens of making money at all. These hacks that I wrote, they were purely for myself. Honestly, they were garbage for quite a while. They didn't even get good until I was basically in like late years of high school. And I would only really do it with like a handful of friends that I had met on these forums. It's just fun. Yeah.
Yeah. So I never really myself got into game hacking. I did a little bit of modding back in the early Doom days, if that's saying something. But I've been really curious because it seems like, as someone who's still pretty much on the outside of that community, that there is a pretty robust and thriving community. Can you talk a little bit about the game hacking community? And I'm really interested in how it compares to like the reversing community. I know there's overlap, certainly, but like the reversing community for those focused on malware analysis versus the reversing community that's focused on game hacking.
Yeah, so there's a lot here, honestly, in that question. So first off, my kind of like exit from the whole game hacking scene happened somewhere in my high school years. That's the point at which I really started focusing on like college and becoming a professional programmer, because that's what I thought I was going to do. So I kind of got out of that maybe when I was like 17, 18, something like that. And I started focusing on programming. So of course the scene has changed a lot since then. But from what I can tell you, because I was in it for quite a while, is those people who were involved in that scene were and still are some of the best technically capable people that I've ever met. And I'm talking about people I've met professionally in my current career, my past at college, throughout my life. Some of the most technically sophisticated people I've ever met were on those game hacking forums. It wasn't just a bunch of kids. It was like professional people who worked as programmers in different jobs would come and do this hobby for fun. And everyone would socialize on these forums because they all enjoyed games. They all enjoyed learning about games. And they liked knowing about the Windows internals that allowed them to get around the, at that time, pretty simplistic anti-cheat engines. So you asked, like, how has it changed a little bit? It's gotten so much harder, honestly. Like, even as a professional RE nowadays, I wouldn't dream of going after some of these kernel-based anti-cheats, or there's even more crazy stuff. I find that too difficult, honestly. It starts turning into a job again. There's major credit to those people who can still continue on that art form because it has only gotten more advanced. Back when I was doing it, the kind of like state of the art was you had something like Punkbuster that was basically running YAR rules against code in memory. That's basically what we were doing at the time. And to get around that, you would just patch the code. You just let it not not return that you were detected. It was pretty simple even as a kid to get around. Nowadays it's just so much harder. You're in like the depths of the Windows kernel. People have like expert level knowledge of the hypervisors that are going on here. People are writing their own hypervisors. You have people hooking up like direct memory capture cards so they can read the physical pages of the computer without being detected. They're writing their own rootkits and bootkits. It's madness. Honestly, it's crazy. Massive kudos to the people who can still do that. In a lot of ways, the people who were in that scene when I was have graduated to professional careers in some of the most technically complex fields. A lot of those people went on to work for those very same anti-cheat companies. A handful of them work at various security-based companies. Some became regular programmers doing really good work, I'm sure. It's a very interesting scene, and you had a lot of different people of all age groups, and I loved it. Everyone just talked and had fun and taught each other, and we all got really good because of that.
Thinking about game hacking is still kind of on the fringes of legality. So it's very much an enthusiast, hobbyist community, at least largely driven by that, it would appear. Reverse engineering, on the other hand, now has become a profession. It's something that you go and do at places like Google and Mandiant. But I would say earlier on, reversing was very much a hobbyist, enthusiast thing. Do you think that's changed reverse engineering, how the community's changed and the profession has formalized into what it is today?
I think it's good for reversing that it has kind of grown up, honestly. It's gotten away from the hacking is bad and don't do it because you're going to go to jail. I think that's bad for the career in general. I think people deserve the right to know how the machines that they use work, period. Now, when you start talking about game hacking, absolutely, is there morals there that are fuzzy? For sure. It gets really into a gray area depending on what you're talking about. Are you talking about cheating in online games? Are you talking about putting overlays and injecting code so that you can draw a clock on your game, right? Those are different things. An anti-cheat doesn't really care. You're messing with the memory of the game or you're manipulating mouse or keyboard movements. That's cheating in that scene. I personally developed my own moral code at that time. So for me as a kid, it was pretty simple. My skill set when I'm competing in these online games is whatever skills I have. So I will use my programming skills to make me better at this game. I'm never going to share that with other people because I did that effort, and it would be bad if I was to just give this away for free and basically ruin the game. There was people who could write cheats that would like DOS a server and take the server down, or kill everyone on the whole server without doing anything. That's stuff that just breaks the game. That's terrible. I would never have done that as a kid, and I never did. Um, what I would do is go into like the training lobbies and write my hacks and figure out all the math to learn linear algebra to draw all over the game and do the 3D projections. And how do you write an aimbot system that can predict the bullet drop with the correct lead based on the player's velocity and acceleration? What if they're in a jet and they're doing 360s with complex rotational velocities? Like, that was the stuff that I cared about. I didn't really care about the online stuff. Like, yeah, did I test how good my stuff was in lobbies a handful of time? Totally. I was a kid. Forgive me for that. But like, most of it was not spent just buying or selling cheats online. Like, that's not the stuff I did. What I did was I played with the math. I learned how to do it. I wrote the code. I had fun with it, and I showed it off to my friends on the forum. That's what we did. We weren't interested in making money. We weren't interested in selling it. We weren't interested in ruining the games, because we liked them. We were fans of the game. We just also happened to be programmers that had that skill set too. And we were kids at the time, of course. So a lot of us grew up and moved away from the cheating scene, and we moved into more maybe generally accepted okay careers. And I think that's fine, honestly. I think a lot of people got started by learning the internals of stuff. As I've become older, I've decided for myself that, like, glad I did it. Probably wouldn't do it again, but also wouldn't change how it happened.
Well, and I think it's really interesting from a learning perspective, because a lot of, if I look back on my career as someone who's been through the educational system and been a part of the educational system, one of the things that always frustrated me early on was how pointless some of it all felt. We're doing exercises in college courses just to get a grade, and then we throw it all away when we leave. We take the knowledge, of course, but here you have tangible results that you can build a community of others that also want to learn. And it's just a really interesting, and I think kind of a very exciting way to have gotten into and learned reverse engineering and Windows internals and all the stuff that came along with that. The math that you're talking about, something I never even considered, how much you probably learned about math because you had a direct and direct application to that knowledge.
Yeah, it was. It's kind of mind blowing if I'm completely honest about like how I was able to do that at the ages that I was doing it. And I don't say that to brag. I mean, like, literally, my own mind is sometimes blown that I did some of that. I was staring at like matrices, like projection matrices and world and view matrices in memory of live games like Battlefield 3 as a 16-year-old kid. And I was able to visually look at all the floating numbers changing, and I could be like, oh, that's a projection matrix. And then I could rebuild the class, and then I knew the linear algebra to go and write the 3D game code to actually like overlay a box around players. That's crazy. And the only reason I was able to do that is because I was motivated. I was like obsessed level motivated about this stuff. And that's because my friends did it. We talked about it all the time. I'd get back from school and I would just do that for hours and hours and hours. And that's why I'm good at what I do professionally. It's simply because of that. And people ask me all the time, they're like, how do you learn what you did? How do I learn this thing, whether that thing is a new language or tool or whatever? And I believe extremely strongly the answer to that is simply pick something that you enjoy and do it until it's no longer fun, and then do it a little bit beyond that, maybe even two, and then move on to the next thing and repeat that cycle for infinity. And if you do that, you'll become a master at anything you do. It's just simply staying sufficiently motivated, because that is going to drive you to the depths that are necessary to become a master of whatever it is.
Yeah, great advice. So we're talking a lot about the learning process and a little bit of the history between these different worlds where reverse engineers live. What is technology now that's on the horizon? We're entering this age of very tangible AI, and where do you see reversing going? What's something that excites you about the future?
Yeah. There's a lot of stuff, honestly, that's exciting to me. Um, from like a programming perspective, like just technology in general, at a low level, of course. The the modern thing that excites me a lot is WebAssembly. I spent a little bit of time playing with this in my S-Trace project, which is public open source. Um, I like the idea that WebAssembly is basically an assembly format that actually runs like within the web browser, but could also be a architecture for desktop applications. If you imagine a world where Microsoft, Apple, maybe Linux itself decide to embed like a kernel WebAssembly just-in-time compiler or even a really fast interpreter, that would be a world in which desktop apps, web apps, all these things would be running an assembly language that is pretty close to like native code, honestly, and doing it in a way where you have like basically a memory sandbox and the only APIs that you can invoke are ones that are defined by this interface boundary. I think it's kind of like the core of what a lot of stuff was trying to do in the past. Like the JVM was trying to be that be all end all architecture where you just write the interpreter for your platform and it can run anywhere. And it was successful in a lot of ways. But assembly is like the WebAssembly is like the modern version of that. And I played with embedding it into the Windows kernel in that S-Trace project that I mentioned before. And that process kind of solidified the idea to me that this should be a thing. Like I should be able to have WebAssembly code that I can ship you down from a website and you can pretty safely execute it in a sandbox on your machine. And there's the ability to ship it to an ARM machine or an x86 machine. And like, it's just that you target WebAssembly and it literally runs everywhere. I think that's the coolest thing in the world. So I hope we see that. Yeah. If we move on from like low level bits like that, I'm a big C++ fan. I think C++ gets a lot of stuff right, probably because it has a high learning ceiling. So there's a lot of sophistication built in there. But I think C++ also gets a ton of stuff wrong. So when you look at languages like Rust, I think Rust is a really good example of like how to correctly do package management. And more importantly, beyond that, how to get your tooling correct. Rust excites me as the future because it's kind of the first time you've seen a pretty mainstream language actually get this stuff right. So I hope we see a lot more languages kind of inspired by the way that Rust does, in particular, its tooling. I won't comment on the safety features and stuff of Rust too much because that's not the most interesting thing in the world to me. I think the tooling and the developer experience that it offers, though, is really amazing. And I hope more stuff moves that way. We should have easy-to-use tools and easy-to-use programming languages. And then you asked about reversing, so sorry for the long programming-related tangent. But reversing, I am most excited about like similarity mechanisms. So how do you determine if the binary you're looking at is similar to another binary? How do you determine if the sequence of assembly code looks like other sequences of assembly code? We're kind of in a world right now where we're using Yara for everything. And Yara is great. Don't get me wrong. It's really cool. We have a very efficient language to express pattern matching. That's awesome. But it's also really limited, right? You can't write a generic signature across different architectures. You have to have the domain expertise and knowledge to be able to know which particular bytes do you mask out and which bytes matter. And then I got to go write 4 or 5 different signatures for different variants depending on the compiler used in the optimization level and which architecture. It's just a lot of stuff. We don't necessarily live in a world where that needs to be the way that stuff happens. I think there's a lot of parallels you can draw between what we're trying to do in security and how the body, like the human body, operates. If you look at the immune system, it has like mechanisms that can tell if it's been infected by a bacteria or a virus that is similar to another one that it's seen before. Like your body has mechanisms that do that. As a reversing and larger security community, I hope we move more towards that. So we've seen really sophisticated developments with like the computing power available with servers. We have real machines that can have terabytes of RAM. That's crazy. We can network these machines to be like basically infinitely scalable with connectivity around the world. That's crazy. And we have this explosion of like machine learning research, and I'm calling it machine learning on purpose. I don't think AI is the right term, but that's a different discussion that we can have sometime. Machine learning is getting really good and can learn complex representations of this kind of stuff I'm talking about. Imagine if we could train a machine learning model using all this computing power to literally learn what is the correspondence between high-level languages like C, C++, Rust, whatever it is, whatever high-level human programming language it is, and learn how a compiler maps that down to assembly. It can learn some kind of representation of like, what is the logic actually expressed within these x86 assembly instructions or these ARM assembly instructions. And it can learn to be invariant against the architecture itself. It can learn to be invariant against the multitude of compiler optimizations that happen. And it can really start to create some kind of embedding where we can perform queries that ask, is this logic itself similar? Is the structure of the control flow graph built by this program similar? Is the data flow between this sequence of assembly instructions in this order similar? Is the function call graph similar? We can ask these really high level questions out of a system like that is much more similar to how like natural systems actually work, like our body, like so many other things. We should, in my opinion, move away from the more simplistic byte pattern matching. In the long run, of course, tons of research and actual tools need to be developed first. But the future of reversing, I think, is more advanced similarity tools, more advanced machine learning assisted tools that help an RE answer those questions like, what static libraries are used? Have I seen this malware before? If I have seen it before, what's the same? What's different? Specific changes about what's different, that kind of stuff, I think is the future of RE.
Yeah, that's all. It's such a manual, labor intensive process right now, and it would be just incredible to see that evolution. And I suspect as well that it is on the horizon. It's got me thinking too. When we look at, we talk a little bit about the game industry, and they have, these are large tech companies that have, teams of very smart people developing anti-cheat engines and other, very sophisticated techniques to make sure their games run as advertised and can guarantee a non-cheat environment during competitions and whatnot. What about like nation states? A lot of our work is on reversing, malicious artifacts, and so what about like nation states and criminal organizations, and just anyone that's at the other end of malware, some software that has more of an illegal or illicit purpose behind it? Do you see them able to leverage the same kind of technology benefits that we're able to now, or that we're seeing on the horizon, as more as a defender?
I think the short answer is like an obvious yes. I think that's the short answer. The long answer is it's always been and always will be a cat and mouse game. So they might make an advance and we'll make an advance. Back and forth forever. Everyone gets better. It's how the world has always worked, and it's how the world's going to continue to work. So if you see, here's my like heuristic, right? There's a lot of people who have a lot of opinions. You can just go on Twitter and you can find bad take after bad take, and then maybe a couple good takes, sure. But people like to oversell what a lot of stuff actually is. Like they say it's going to be revolutionary, or, oh my gosh, this is going to be the apocalypse next year because new thing is happening. In general, when someone is being hyperbolic like that, I'm like, okay, I don't believe you. It's like it's obviously more nuanced than that. So what do I actually think? I think people are just going to get more efficient with all of it. As technology gets better, it's going to be easier to do some things, but the things that we try to do are just going to be more advanced. So we'll be operating at higher levels. We'll be more efficient, rather than having to go on Stack Overflow and like wait for other people to respond. Maybe I'll be able to ask some kind of LLM to quickly give me a reference or generate a little code snippet. If we're talking about AI, do I think it's ever going to replace REs or programmers? Not really, at least not until I'm like completely out of this career and sitting on a beach in Caribbean somewhere when I'm 80. Like, it's not going to happen for a while, in my opinion. I think we're going to see a lot of really cool research on applying these new technologies to specific problem domains, and it will assist humans in getting better and doing that really manual work, as you described it earlier, and just kind of give you some little tips on like the correct path to follow, maybe, or make it better. I don't think either side gets any kind of asymmetric advantage. If anything, maybe it even evens the playing field if we're talking about that, because it gives you ways to scale the defender side, which has historically kind of been outmatched by the volume that attackers can just throw at you because of like code permutation, like even as simple as like recompiling the same binary. Like you can get different hashes and vastly different optimization levels that result in different like assembly bytes that are different. If you don't have good code similarity tools, it's really hard to say that I have seen this before. So we'll be able to answer those kind of questions. Have I seen this before? More efficiently with better tools. So honestly, I think it's probably a net benefit, and I don't think it's going to get rid of defender or attacker jobs and replace everyone anytime soon, honestly.
Okay, so I think that's kind of a great segue into talking about what is likely, if you're listening to the podcast, you've heard of SolarWinds. And Stephen was one of the, if he didn't discover it, he was definitely on the team that were some of the first to bring it to our attention. And it would be really, I think, fascinating to learn more about the behind the scenes rather than just what we saw publicly reported. So Stephen, do you have share some stories with us about your experience there?
Yeah, absolutely. So you alluded to it a little bit, but yes, I was on the Mandiant Flare team that actually found the Sunburst backdoor, and I was the first person to actually find that backdoor and see that code and then reverse it. That was me. I did that with other REs, of course, and there was a lot of other people that worked that incident, and I didn't have a part in a lot of the IR or tracking things and telemetry and a lot of the other work that you have to do in a big event like that. But I did that RE, and I found the backdoor and I reversed it. And the technical bits that you may have read in a Mandiant blog about that backdoor, the Sunburst backdoor to be clear, was done by me at that time. So what actually happened? So it was, first off, crazy. This all kind of went down December of 2020, like right before Christmas. We had like 2 or 3 weeks before Christmas. We basically, so like my involvement got started. I was contacted by our CTO. His name's Charles Carmichael. He messaged me seemingly, at least from my perspective, out of the blue. And he's like, hey, this PCAP file that you analyzed a couple months ago, can you tell me about that? And just to tell that story. So I was working on our malware queue at the time, and just randomly we had a customer that gave me a network capture file and said, hey, we see some like suspicious domains. We don't really know why or how or if this is even anything, but like, can you just analyze this and tell us what you think of this network capture? So I was like, okay, sure. Usually we have more context than that, but I didn't really have anything. So I looked at this PCAP and pretty quickly saw the domains that they had told me they thought were weird. And then I looked at the actual content of like what was being sent and replied to these domains. And pretty quickly I was able to track it down to some public information that SolarWinds had actually identified as what they call their Orion Improvement Program protocol, which was basically just some telemetry data that they sent at some interval to, get some feedback about where their appliance was executing in case there was crashes or whatever. So on its face, I was like, okay, the contents of whatever is happening to this domain seems like it could plausibly come out of some SolarWinds appliance. I knew nothing about SolarWinds. I'd never heard of this product before. What I knew about it was what I could Google online. So yeah, confirmed that there was weird domains, confirmed that the content, at least on its face, looked plausibly legitimate. But we ended up reaching out to SolarWinds, the company, and we were like, can you confirm if your products, any of them really, reach out to any of these domains? And they were like, nope, no idea what you're talking about. That's not us. But this customer was like, I definitely see this. You have the network capture of what we're seeing. What is it? So basically, at that point, I was like, okay, I've done my analysis. I told you what I saw. That's just what I have. If you want more information, you can image your appliance and send it over, and we'll do our best to investigate. But like with anything, that's searching through a needle in a haystack. So I couldn't make any firm promises. But I said, if you send it to us, we will investigate. No fault of them, no fault of us. But that did not end up happening. We were working many other incidents at the time, so there was unfortunately no follow through there. Now, that CTO story that I was telling you about before, he came back. He had found that PCAP. So at that time, unbeknownst to me, we had our own internal incident response investigation of our SolarWinds appliances at FireEye, Mandiant rather, and they were able to tie back the incident responders that were looking at this. They were able to tie back what they were seeing in our environment to that PCAP that I had analyzed a few months prior. So I told the CTO everything that I just told you and what I knew. And then he's like, okay, well, that aligns roughly with what we're seeing. We don't know, but we have plausible reason at least to investigate if our appliance is maybe backdoored or something like that. Or at least we need to rule that out. So he read me in to the, at that time, confidential IR, and myself, Willie Valentine, Jay Smith, we kind of just started looking through everything we had on that appliance. And about 3 days later, I ended up stumbling across the actual Sunburst backdoor implant. I sent a screenshot of the enumeration of commands that we had ended up finding to the two other REs I had mentioned earlier. And we all kind of went like, wow, is this real? Like, is that actually like a backdoor in an appliance like that? And we were so surprised because we verified that the code was signed by SolarWinds. We're like, that's really weird, right? Like, we're staring at malicious code that is completely validly signed, which indicated something really wrong went on. And we all knew that. So yeah, we went up to Michael Sikorsky, who was kind of like the lead of the Flare team at the time. And we said like, hey, like, we think we got it. And, you know, he very quickly ran it up the management chain. And then we put a blog out, not even 3 days later. And that was how the entire SolarWinds incident kind of happened.
Well, that's a feat in and of itself, getting a blog out that quick. Was there something in like what drew your attention to that part of the code? Was there anything in particular, or was it just maybe a happenstance that you found it then?
No, it was not happenstance. So we followed a process. We knew a couple things. The first thing we found out is this appliance loads a lot of .NET DLLs off disk. It was like a plugin based architecture. So we learned that it was a plugin based architecture within the first couple hours of reversing. And we followed a process from there. We realized, okay, if I was an attacker, where would I put bad code? I could put it in the main appliance.exe. Sure. We ran that down for, a couple hours, but pretty quickly we realized this all looks pretty legitimate. So, okay, where's the next place I'd hide it? Well, we know it's a plugin based architecture. maybe I'd put it in a plugin. So we kind of split off from there. We had Willie look through all the IR telemetry data, and he tried to hunt down threads that would indicate that maybe the anomalous network activity we were seeing was coming out of a plugin rather than the main executable. And I spent my time enumerating the paths that all these .NET DLLs could be loaded from. Once I had those potential load paths, I had custom tooling just from my own. I told you I was a developer, so I had .NET analysis tooling of myself. I took all those DLLs, I modified my tool to do a recursive decompilation of all those. It just used dnspy under the hood. It was pretty simple. But I just dumped all that DLL code to disk as text, and I just started grepping over .NET HTTP APIs. We knew that the Orion Improvement Program, kind of like telemetry logic, was somehow related to the weird stuff that we were seeing. So we tried to find that location. We very quickly found the real location, like the legitimate logic that was responsible for this OIP. That's the short form for Orion Improvement Program. We very quickly found the legitimate code that generates that kind of event. But then we also found code that looked like it was doing the same stuff, kind of. Like it was clearly intentionally trying to craft logic that looked similar, but it was putting different kinds of data into these structures. And we had no more context at that point, so we really didn't know like what that was. But we kind of used that as like a this is weird landing point, and we just started cross-referencing from that point to all the places that called that logic. And that eventually led us to a enumeration that looked like it had malicious commands, and that's what I ended up taking a screenshot of and sending to the team. So we followed a process, is my point. I had my own custom tools that I was able to use to do this kind of search through this large amount of data more efficiently. We had IR data that we were able to leverage, and we really just mapped ourselves through the binary until we got to plausible points to pull on, and we pulled those strings until we found what we were looking for. And that's what we did it. That's how we did it.
Yeah, that must have been a really exciting moment when you finally narrowed in on that code and you had it, or you thought you had it. You know, like the probability of this being it all of a sudden went up. That must have been really exciting.
It was exciting, but we were very cautious too. So at that time, like I was not even a senior reverse engineer. I was just reverse engineer. No other titles attached, no principal, no senior, no nothing. I was just a reverse engineer within this large company. And we knew that we were being stared at by like the CTO, the CEO. And we also knew that like, okay, if our company is doing a kind of tight-lipped internal IR, like this is a big deal. So we didn't want to like tell everyone immediately until we knew. So we talked amongst ourselves for like, a couple minutes, really. It was pretty quick that we realized what we had. But like immediately we were like, are we right? Like, are we hallucinating this because we want to be the ones that found something really sketchy, or are we right here? And eventually we convinced ourselves that we were correct, and we ran it up the chain, and we told everyone. And yeah, we spent the next 2-3 days just reversing like crazy to fully understand so we could get the blog out and notify the right people and all the affected victims and stuff like that. But it didn't really hit me like what this was until I saw it in the news. And then I was like, oh wow, like I actually did a thing. Like that's kind of crazy.
Yeah, that would have to be kind of surreal, because it seems like a lot of the RE work is, it kind of by its nature, it's behind the scenes and supporting a lot of other activity, and for that to lead to headline news that I don't remember how long the coverage lasted, but it was a big event and this is coming at the tail end of a year that was full of really big events.
Yeah, it went on for so long. People didn't stop talking about this we're talking about it right now, right?
I was just going to say,
it's 4 years later and we're still talking about it. Yeah. Like it was crazy for a couple months for sure. And then I did some conference talks, and that's when I was like, oh, like people want to hear these stories. Like that's kind of cool. it took a while for me to get used to it, honestly. RE is usually behind the scenes work. So I felt very accomplished that I had played a part in something so big. Like, honestly, it made me feel like a good American citizen, if I'm honest. Like, I did something right. And it also took some pressure off of me personally. Like, you always want that one event in your life where you can be like, I did an accomplishment that was like worthwhile, and I've done what I'm supposed to do, and now I can just do the other stuff. And for me, SolarWinds was that. Like, I don't think I will have as worldwide of an impact as that ever again. And I think that's really cool that like I got to experience that. Honestly, I'm proud of it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's such a great. I think you're right. I mean, everybody. I don't know if everybody, but it's oftentimes a goal to have that sort of a event that you can say I was the person, or I was very much a contributor, to put that onto your career, and regardless of what you use it for, career progression, promotion, who cares? Just the personal sense of accomplishment. So that's really cool.
Yeah.
What so I think there's a lot of lessons learned, and maybe I'm kind of hoping to capture some of that, the stories that weren't necessarily in the news. So is there anything that anyone doing daily RE work could learn from your experience on SolarWinds, and if we have time, other events that you've been involved in?
Yeah. So, I mean, I've been involved in a couple high profile events. Um, we're talking about, I'm not going to say specific stuff too much, but we're talking about like oil pipelines. We're talking about like hospitals. We're talking about like government agencies. We're talking about a lot of events that really impact everyday people and sometimes have lives on the line. So I think the biggest thing when you work stuff like that you have to be cognizant of is you have a moral obligation to like do your job well. You actually have to sit down and do the best you can do 100% when you have something that important because it impacts other people. And you need to be able to walk away from that and say, I did everything I could do, regardless of the outcome. Maybe you don't find the thing you need to find. Maybe you don't accomplish the task that you were given. But you can confidently end your day and be like, I did my 100%. That's probably something I picked up as a kid. I played football when I was a kid. So my coach would always say, like, as long as you leave it all on the field, right? And I think that's true because this stuff is hard. Like it's really, 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 really hard. I have done this since I was a kid, as I explained earlier. I've been in computers pretty much as long as I could read. And every single day I get stuff that I have no idea what I'm looking at. And I feel like I know a lot of stuff. And I actually do know a lot of stuff, but I don't know everything. And I know that I don't know everything. And that's absolutely a source of anxiety. And it's a source of fear and nervousness and all those unpleasant emotions. So you have to like really accept that that's a reality and then do it anyway. And just acknowledge it and let yourself feel it because you're a person, you're a normal person. But then like just set it aside and then just have some logical confidence that you can at least do your best and design an approach to follow this and make sure you're methodical and make sure you develop your workflows that can handle new things as they show up and be willing to learn and constantly be learning. Maybe you need to go the extra step and start writing custom tooling because no one's developed a tool that can do this thing that you need to do. Like you have to have the skill set and be okay with sometimes taking that little sidetrack to like spend the time to do that. And you have to accept that like everything is broken. Your tools are going to break. Your operating system's going to break. Someone's going to shove ads in your face and that's going to be unpleasant. Like stuff is not perfect and you have to accept that. And then you have to try to make it better and do your part and be in the right mind space so that you can accomplish that stuff. There's a really big satisfaction when you can help people by building a new tool or fix an old tool, or just learn a new thing. And then next time you feel anxious in the future, you can look back at your past accomplishments and think to yourself, okay, if I could do that really difficult thing, that's probably a pretty good signal that I can handle this current really difficult thing. And if you give me enough time, I now have the confidence that I can tell my current self that you will get through this and you will look back on it like all those other prior accomplishments too. And that's the real thing, is you just need to get comfortable with being uncomfortable and be okay with learning and always improving.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating, to hear comments like that from someone like you, that if no one knew you, they just knew your reputation and your work, they'd say, wow, what an accomplished RE. They must know everything inside and out. And the reality is you don't. You're always learning. There's always something new. There's that anxiety. I was talking to a colleague the other day, and you kind of described it. There's a name for it, but it's like, you've got despair. You've taken on a project, and there's kind of this despair, like, why did I do this? I'm not good enough. And then there's acceptance, and then you kind of go through these stages. And I think that's good. I think it's really good to hear, because I think as a community, when I'm teaching or training or talking, like, that's polished. I know how it's going to begin. I know how it's going to end. And I want to make that really effective. So I'm up there presenting in a way that makes it look like, well, I just showed up and I killed it, and here's the results. And so I think, kind of as a community or an industry, we give this perception that, we've got these people that just know how to do everything. And there are certainly people that are just phenomenal. It's also very common that there is a lot of anxiety, there is a lot of uncertainty, and there is a lot of self-doubt, and it is it is a part of, I think, the career, and it's okay. Like you said, you've got to identify it, you've got to find ways to work around it, but it's not abnormal if anyone's dealing with it.
No, it's not abnormal at all. And yeah, you do have to accept it and just acknowledge it, and then do it anyway, because everyone has that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think what really got me into reversing myself, and I got into it later in my career, but what really motivated me at the beginning was just to prove to myself that I could do it, and it's taken off from there, I guess.
Yeah, and I think that's the right mindset. Exactly that. Just that question that you propose to yourself, like, can I do that? And then that journey that you're going to follow to answer that question, that's where growth happens. And then you just have to keep doing that. And you need to make sure that you like apply, and this is maybe a weird thing that I use in my own life. Like, I apply engineering principles to my life. So is there something wrong in my current life? Okay, let's take it apart and analyze it, and then figure out what new processes I need to adopt to be able to handle that thing I haven't encountered before, so that next time I come across it, I can handle it better. And that means, like, having hobbies like slacklining that de-stress me and give me periods of focus and relaxation, so that I can live with a somewhat stressful job at times and have the time to think to myself about how I approach hard tasks that I'm about to do. And building a community around you of friends, whether they're in person or online, that you can speak to about issues you're having, whether they're technical or personal or what have you. And then, like, of course, family and friends and significant others and stuff, so that you have that support system that you can rely on when you need to, because you don't know when you're going to need to, but you need to have that around. And honestly, the technical skills are important, of course, but the social ones are too. Like, you need to be able to function in the world as a person, and you need to focus on all that as a cohesive whole. At least that's what I think. At least, yeah.
Oh yeah. Very good point too. Because I think it's, at least, from my vantage point, it's easy to fixate on learning the bits and the bytes. It's complex. There's this massive learning curve that never really seems to degrade. So I think it's really easy to focus on that and kind of forget about, well, I still need to communicate things that I find. I still need to be able to present. I still need to be able to run projects and all of the other things that go along with just living in society, in a professional career. Is there anything outside of then the reversing that you think helped to, learning the technical part of reversing that really helped to make you a well-rounded reverse engineer?
Hmm. Absolutely. And honestly, as I've gotten older and maybe as my career has progressed as well, I've maybe even kind of developed the opinion that social skills in some ways are just as, if not more important than raw technical skills. There's people who maybe focus on, I am the best 0 day finder in the entire world, and no one can compete with that. But if you can't articulate and express those technical issues to the right people, you finding those kind of bugs will have zero impact and will not change anything and won't make your life better, won't fix the software, won't do anything. You need to have the right combination across the matrix of everything that makes up life. And being deficient in any one function is going to compromise other columns of that matrix.
Yeah, well said. Well said. All right, so you're very much involved and engaged in the community, and it sounds like you have been for a very long time. You have some fantastic projects out on GitHub. What kind of drew you to producing those and making those public? Start making more of your tooling public, and just maybe like what suggestions do you have for others that maybe want to follow in your footsteps?
Yeah, I think the reason for why I enjoy that kind of open source work so much is because that's how I grew up. That's where I learned what I learned. Everything that I ever learned was from an online forum. I say that I'm self-taught, but that's actually a lie because I'm taught by the internet and I'm taught by all the brilliant people who were kind enough to document their work and respond to questions. And those people who answer the Stack Overflow questions, those are the gods of the world. Um, that's the kind of thing that inspired awe in me as a kid. And that is now what fulfills me because the idea that I could have such an impact on like other young people or maybe whatever age, honestly, it doesn't even matter if they're young or not, of just by like solving problems that no one has solved before and really actually making stuff better. Like I want to be able to like sit on the beach when I'm 80. This is a theme apparently, if you can't tell. I guess this is my retirement plan now. I want to be able to sit on the beach when I'm 80 and know that like I helped a lot of people and I actually am like leaving the world in a better place. And yeah, maybe my little niche is just open source RE tooling, which is definitely a niche, but that's something, right? And I enjoy that. So that's where it comes from. I just want to document what I do and put good stuff out there for other people to use and enjoy and make their lives and jobs easier and better.
For those that are maybe new to the field, do you think there is an approach that they should be considering for getting involved in open source or releasing their own open source tools? I get asked enough, I want to create a PE parser, but that looks like that's been done to death. And my response is, yeah, maybe it has, but you'll learn a ton. You can put it on GitHub. That can help with potential employers and community and all sorts of other very positive things. So, yeah, any suggestions along those lines?
Yeah, there's a couple dimensions to your question. So, do you do stuff like that even though it's been done before? Yes, period. It doesn't matter if other people are going to use it or not. Do you enjoy it? Are you motivated? Is it going to teach you something? If those questions have a yes as an answer, then you do it because you're going to learn something really cool. Now, you can't be delusional and expect that your PE parser is going to be better than every other PE parser ever written because you're some kind of superhuman. No, that's crazy. Like, you do it for yourself because the learning is good. And if you actually end up eventually creating something completely novel, like also have the confidence to like pitch it, go on Twitter, be that annoying person that's like, hey, I wrote something cool. Like maybe it helps you. And then you just keep saying that for a while, and maybe it catches on, maybe it doesn't, but you don't get demotivated either way. You're just doing a thing, and maybe people care, maybe people don't. And you just keep doing that. You just find stuff that's interesting. That's going to motivate you because it's inherently interesting. And then you do whatever needs to be done to learn it and accomplish it and release it. And you just follow that process forever. And that's what open source is. If you try to use a tool that someone put out there for free, rather than just going and opening an issue and complaining, you maybe spend a little bit more time to figure out the root cause, and then you make the issue. Or maybe you go even further and you find the root cause and then you submit a PR, and then you're really nice to the author and you tell them how much they love their tool, and then your PR gets merged, right? That's the ideal. It makes everyone feel good. You just fixed a problem in the world and you gain some skills while doing it. Like that's what open source is. The problems happen when you have unrealistic expectations, because then you're just going to get demotivated. The problems happen when you're not learning in a way that's interesting to you, because then you're going to fall off and you're not going to accomplish it. And then you're going to feel demotivated. And don't be a jerk. Like, don't demand stuff from people. It's people like me who are just doing it for fun or doing it to learn. And there's not many people who are doing it as jobs. So don't treat it like it's people that are doing open source for jobs, because that ruins it for everyone. And that's my advice, honestly. Just find stuff that's fun and do it and be nice.
Yeah, great advice. And I think it's when you stop and look at, if you're in any cybersecurity profession that you're in, but reversing in particular, if you stop and look at the tools that you use, I know when I stop and look at the tools I use on a daily basis, it is vast majority open source tools. The community makes a big difference, and being a part of it in any way, shape, or form, I think is just going to be a net positive for you and for the communities that depend on that work.
Yeah, and it's really nice too, because if you ever leave the company you're at, for example, you can continue to use open source stuff. That's very different from a lot of the admittedly amazing stuff that companies have internally. But if you share your work publicly, you are enabling people who are not necessarily in your profession. You're enabling hobbyists to have that ability to self-learn as well. That's massive. You have the ability to rely on people that are in other companies. You just have a lot more of an audience. And that is a very unique advantage to open source that not many other ways of engineering kind of have built into them.
All right. Well, I think we are nearing the end here. We're just about an hour in. What are good ways to get a hold of you for anyone who wants to, follow your work, contribute to your projects, or just simply learn more about you and all the great stuff that you've been involved in and are doing?
Yeah. Honestly, contribute to my projects on GitHub. That's helped me with that open source stuff. Honestly, that's probably the most active way you're going to get to interface with me. I'm obviously joking a little bit, but also kind of serious. That's probably the best way to actually get my attention. I have a lot of stuff in my life outside of work. I try to stay offline. So, I'm maybe not going to respond to a random email here or there. And I don't want to invite too much out of band communication. But if your interest is making good tools and fixing problems in the world and contributing to open source with that kind of mindset that we just talked about earlier, then I'm going to make time for you. I'll spend all my personal time talking to you on GitHub. So you can follow me there on GitHub. My handle is SteveMK14EBR. That's my online handle for everything. Twitter, GitHub, every forum I've ever been on online. You can see my entire learning process from the age I was 10 up to now if you do the right research online. It's all out there in the open. So you'll find me.
Yeah, and your GitHubs, it'll be your personal GitHubs, and then a lot of your big projects are also on the Mandiant GitHub.
Yeah, so my personal GitHub is SteveMK14EBR. If you go on the Mandiant GitHub, you'll be able to look at the contributor history. Some of the projects I maintain are GoReSim for Golang analysis, strace for hooking system calls. Honestly, I don't even know. Just take a look. There's a lot there.
Yeah, there's a lot there. Okay. Well, Stephen, thank you so much for your time. Really enjoyed talking to you and learning about all the interesting things that your career and everything you've been working on. Hopefully, you're down the road. You can come back and we can catch up again. I have a feeling we could probably talk for the rest of for hours on end. So thank you again for your time.
Of course. Yeah. And I think you're right. I think I could definitely talk to you for quite a while. So maybe in a year or so, we'll see. But thanks for having me.
And that's all for this episode of Behind the Binary. Thanks so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed the show, please consider subscribing and leaving a review. It really helps us to reach new listeners. Until then, stay curious and keep exploring.